Hi, I'm Frank Rivero, and welcome back to the Mortuary Channel. I plan on doing something a little bit different today. And what I'm going to do is based on 30 plus years of being in this business and reviewing death certificates. So this is going to be a multi-part series, and it's going to be titled Stay Out of My Morgue. I know that seems a little odd, but it's very appropriate, and you'll see why shortly. So the first episode of this, which is this one, is going to be about the major cause of death that I have seen over my career as a mortician or an undertaker. And it may not be what most people imagine, but I think it's a good lesson, and to the extent that I'm not looking to profit from anybody's death, I would prefer that you stay alive and healthy. I'm going to share my thoughts, and a lot of this has to do with how I live my life and what I do to try to stay out of my own morgue. The basic idea here is educational, but be advised that I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not, I'm just a mortician, and these are my own opinions. You could check with your doctor or do your own research, and I think you can readily find the things that I'm talking about on YouTube or other, medical journals, or there's just a lot of resources out there. With the internet, it's endless, but there's also a lot of confusion. So let's give you the mortician's opinion on all this. The lifespan and health span are very different. You can have a long lifespan and be miserable for the last 30 years, or in a nursing home, or disabled, or severely disabled, to the extent where you can't get up and, enjoy your life. So I don't find that appealing personally. I don't have any interest in that. So that's called a health span. And then your lifespan obviously is, how old you are when you ultimately do end up in someone's morgue. So I want to address the number one cause of death as I see it. And it's multifaceted, but it in fact just deals with one particular issue. Now, over the last 50 years, medicine has made great strides in extending people's lifespan. And the majority of that involves antibiotics, which have really reduced the amount of deaths due to infection, and trauma care. In other words, ER care for things like automobile accidents, gunshot wounds, and other trauma to the body. The medical establishment has made tremendous strides in those two fields, and that's what's led to the longer lifespan in general. On the other hand, advancements in cardiovascular health, cerebral vascular health, cancer, neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's, and other, and by the way, that's a horrible disease. It's really sad what happens in the ALS, Parkinson's, and in my opinion, from what I've seen in being just directly involved in handling these cases, talking to family members, doing my own research, and more than anything, having the access to over 40,000 death certificates at this point, is that all of these things are related. And they all come under a category which I've never heard it detailed like this prior to the last maybe 5, 10 years, but I've heard it now, and I've heard a lot of physicians, mostly holistic physicians, talking about it, and I agree 100%. And this is metabolic disease or metabolic syndrome. And that is really a basket of diseases that lead to very poor outcomes, generally speaking, and also lead to a very poor quality of life. And again, included in that is cardiovascular, like heart attacks and things like that. Other issues that lead to poor circulation, which leads to amputations and just a poor outcome. Cerebrovascular, which is, we're talking about vascular accidents in the brain or clotting in the brain, leading to strokes. Again, not a good way. Some people survive just fine. Other people will have very detrimental lasting effects, and that's unfortunate. Cancer, and the neurodegenerative diseases, the ALS, the Parkinson's, things where you just deteriorate. Metabolic syndrome. Diabetes is readily recognized as a metabolic issue. Insulin resistance, which is not talked about a lot, but has direct implications with diabetes and with all of these other diseases, including cancer. Non-alcoholic fatty liver, that is another big one. So, in my opinion, again, not a physician, not a scientist, not a researcher, just a layman expressing my beliefs, the number one culprit for all of this is excessive sugar consumption. The average amount of sugar consumed in this country is ridiculous over a year, like over, in the 100+ pounds of sugar if you include sodas, you include donuts, you include other, desserts and then the carbohydrates that turn into sugar. We're talking pastas, rice, things like that. Sugar is an absolute villain in my world. Something that I would sooner drink arsenic or any poison, really, because it is exactly that, poison. And a lot of people don't understand that carbohydrates, your body converts that to sugar. So stay away from sugar and stay away from carbohydrates as much as possible. You also should be made aware that just because somebody's overweight or, in many cases obese, number one, there's no reason to blame them really, because the bottom line is that the food that is being promulgated and pushed in this day and age is not wholesome. It's not whole. It's all or mostly processed food. And processed food, once again, is poison. If you're eating processed foods, you're getting a lot of carbs, a lot of salt, a lot of sugar, and not a lot of nutrients, and your body is not meant to burn that for fuel. The processed foods also leads to, apart from overweight and obesity, which there's several different kinds. Some are hereditary. People are just built differently, and that's just normal. Some of it is by eating too much too often, And but most, if not all of it, is from what you're eating, the processed foods and the overeating. There's two types of being, overweight or fat or whatever title you want to put on that. One is subcutaneous, which means it's under your skin. So, you have just a fair bit of insulation layer between under your epidermis. But the other one, and the one that really is the cause for concern, is the non-alcoholic fatty liver. And that really is where you start seeing the insulin resistance, you start seeing the cardiovascular disease, you start seeing the cerebrovascular disease, and probably the number one killer of all, cancer. So after that lengthy explanation, much longer than I wanted it to be, and this is a topic that could go on for literally days and does in many different settings, and I'm going to try to link a few YouTube descriptions so that you can go kind of start checking things out for yourself if you desire to do so and have time. But the way I have approached it in my own life is, if I go to a grocery store and I see an item and it has a barcode on it, I don't buy it. It's just that simple, and I won't eat it. On the other hand, if it is, grown in the ground, coming off a tree, or an animal, or from product of an animal that's not been mistreated and grass-fed and well taken care of, and otherwise humanely raised, then generally I have no problem. I tend to steer more towards wild-caught fish when I want more of a carnivore type diet, but I wouldn't hesitate to eat grass-fed beef. I believe, and in my own experience, I don't believe that'll harm you. I think that the antibiotics and the steroids and the things that they put, and the way they treat the animal too, by the way, it's nothing to take lightly. But all those things add up to a bad outcome if you are ingesting that stuff. That's number one. So you got to watch what you eat. Number two is you got to watch how often you eat. Right now, the recommended guidelines for eating are absolutely ridiculous, in my opinion. You're supposed to eat 3 meals a day: breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then in between that, you're going to have some snacks, and some people do even more than that. So, give or take 5 meals a day. That's a lot. And what that does is it causes your insulin to go up and down, and up and down, and up and down. And ultimately, it will lead to pre-diabetes, and the next step is full-blown diabetes. And the diabetic life is a horrible one, and it will lead to other diseases. Again, part of this metabolic syndrome situation that will end up either causing an early death or a very miserable end of life. So I am a proponent of intermittent fasting. There are a lot of videos on that online. I don't particularly advocate for any diet. There's all kinds of fad diets, and then there's other diets that involve elevating your keto, but I'm not a big fan of that. I just think that intermittent fasting makes a lot of sense, because the human being who historically is a hunter-gatherer would have to go out and forage for food or hunt and kill game to be able to eat. And obviously you're not going to be able to do that 24/7. You're not going to be able, that wasn't, you can't open a refrigerator and have a chicken or a fish hop out at you, you'd have to go out and get it, and therefore there'd be times when you'd be hungry. And I think that hunger is good for you, and can be controlled if you just kind of train yourself. I'm not going to get into, in this video anyway, necessarily details on intermittent fasting, but I believe if there's one thing you can do for yourself to protect your well-being and your health span, is that intermittent fasting. There are many other things. There are supplements out there on the market, mostly through the holistic circles, that should give you some direction. And I'm going to pick out a couple of the videos that I've seen on intermittent fasting and link them also, that I think could be helpful to someone if they wanted to go up this road. So that's a very brief introduction into the series that I'm planning on filming. It's a departure from what I usually do, which is, mechanical stuff and maintenance and operation of the mortuary and the crematory, logistical stuff, which, it's probably not that interesting to most people, but, if you're mechanically inclined, you might like it. And just as a kind of heads up going forward, I'm going to begin by kind of detailing the other ways that I can see that people pass away unexpectedly or unnecessarily, and start targeting each one of those with some basic suggestions. Most of it's common sense. I mean, if you got some time on your hands and you want to get one man's opinion, it might not be a bad idea just to look it over. I have myself a fair bit of experience in self-defense and in situational awareness, which at the end of this I may just detail some of that. I don't know if it's relevant at this point. You can listen to me and leave a comment if you disagree with me. I'm always happy to read somebody and see what their opinion is, and see if we can either come to an agreement down the line or agree to disagree. But to that end, the things that I see most commonly here, unfortunately, are homicides, and trailing that very closely are fentanyl overdoses and other overdoses, mostly opiate or opioid related, and motor vehicle accidents. And then segueing from that, a little bit less, but not that uncommon, industrial accidents. And ultimately my goal is just to touch on all of them and give some heartfelt advice. So thanks for your time. I appreciate it. We'll see you soon. I'll try to keep these coming as frequently as possible. Have a good one. Be safe. Take care of the people you love. Bye-bye.